Okay, so I'm gonna try to make this. Okay, so I like to use the separate pieces. So you've got the one piece, the hand tool. This is disposable when you use it on clients. Otherwise, you can practice with it at home. And then you've got your, I like the angle blade when I'm doing my strokes. I also like to practice on my mat from the back, like I would be doing it on a person, from like the back and the sides. So I kind of move around the mat. If you have a table that's thinner at the end, you can set this on your table at the end and then move around the table so you act like this is your client, because that's the best way to practice your patterns. So when I push the blade out, I usually push the butt end of it through the paper. I always put this in over my tray or over wherever I'm working, because you don't want to drop it on the ground, because then you have to throw it away because it might be damaged. So you put it in, you want it about halfway in, just so the bottom of this is all the way inside the metal so it doesn't slide out. And then once you get it halfway in, I just angle it backwards. So you kind of think of it as like a calligraphy pin. Everybody might have their angle just a tiny bit different, but that's about what it should look like here. So, and then when I set it on this paper or on the practice mat, this blade needs to be perfectly perpendicular to the thing the entire stroke. You don't want to dig it in like this. You don't want to turn it sideways. So when you're doing strokes, you set it nice and flat, and then you do a consistent pull through the stroke, and then you lift it out. So you want to make sure that it is the constant depth all the way through the stroke. You can't really it's not a pencil, so you're not like lifting at the end. You want to keep a consistent pressure and then lift it when you're done. So the pattern that I like to use the most is really natural and it usually follows most hair patterns. And I'll start at the front and I just make a curve, and then I'm just gonna go along and I'm gonna do about 5 upwards strokes all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. So I've made it halfway. Can you see it? Okay, so I've made it halfway through the brow now. If you want to help yourself, you can create these little dash marks right here. Let me see if I can like zoom in on you. No, come on. Let me see it. I don't even know how clear that is. So you create the little dash mark, and that's your transition line. So then you can continue to bring your next strokes only to that line. And then you'll add the bottom ones here, kind of like a palm tree just falling over. Once I have those bottom skeleton, I call them skeleton strokes because this is the first pass and you're trying to get your outline reinforced before you go in there and pack in too much. So I've done my bottom skeleton strokes, and now I'm gonna add my arch. So wherever I stopped and started that transition point is where I'm going to start bringing these. And my goal, the end of my strokes are all pointing towards the tail because that's the most natural look. I really hope you can see this. So that's kind of, for the skeleton stroke, that's gonna be your first goal, is just to get that pattern in there. And you don't want to make X's. You don't want to crisscross. You can touch them, but you don't want to crisscross. So after this, I would wipe the pigment in, put the gel numbing on, and then I would do the same thing on the other brow. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I would dot my transition. So then for this part, I would come around the side of the person and finish up the bottom strokes, because this makes sure that I'm keeping this blade as straight into their skin as possible. So now I have the beginning again. You can see the beginning strokes. I'm going to add from right where this one stopped. I'm going to angle this one down. So you're trying to mimic the same pattern as the other side. So now you can see that I have both of them with their skeleton strokes in. So what I would do next is I would come back to this brow and I would go in between the strokes that I did before, and I would just fill it up. Same thing at the top, just wherever I can fit them without crisscrossing. So that would be my second pass, and now that brow is a lot more full. Then I would do the same thing on this side. I like to pull from whatever edge I'm trying to be very straight. So since I'm coming from the bottom, I want this line really, really straight. Occasionally, I will come back in, like right here, I feel like there's a little bit of an empty spot, so I'll just come from the top and I'll make a baby stroke coming down to fill that top line up as well. As long as your blade is straight in the skin and you're stretching from at least 2 1/3 way, when you set this hand down, that's kind of a third way, you're gonna be good. You just want that skin taut. So now I'm just gonna add a few more in here to build it. And then I would come around the person and I would look at the brows and check and make sure that both outlines and arches look the same. Sometimes if you make one side a little too straight, you have to go and kind of curve one of those top strokes a little to make it match the other side. So this is your goal, is to make them match as much as possible. And then at that point, you would do a pigment mask, you would let it sit for a few minutes, and then you would wipe it off. And then I usually don't do too much more after that because I don't want to overwork the skin, and then they come back for their touch up and you can adjust those things. So that's the start.